Well, after all the talk, I'm back right here, and it's all about the latest corruption report commissioned by Shraj, worked on by the Ghana Statistical Service, and of course, with support from the UNODC. But it paints a certain picture, and one of the institutions that has not liked this report, so to speak, has been the Ghana Police Service. Of course, it has been the first one we've seen that has spoken about fact versus perception. The person who basically is at the helm of affairs at the Ghana Statistical Service, who spearheaded this, is here with us this morning for a conversation on what exactly the metrics were, what went into the report, the methodologies and all of that, and also to respond in a way to some of the accusations that have been leveled against this. We're pleased to give you, as we get into our big stories on corruption, Professor Samuel Kobina Enim. Prof, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, Benjamin.
Thank you for joining the conversation.
Pleasure.
Let me ask you, first of all, what has the response been like? How have you felt on the back of this latest report? It's the first that I have seen in this republic that moves away from perception and says this is the reality. How do you feel about coming out with something like this?
To be honest with you, I'm quite excited. And the reason why I say that is we just don't want to be putting out statistical products for the sake of it. The whole idea is to generate public discourse on it, and hopefully it will get the attention of policymakers to say that this is what the public is concerned about, this is what is affecting our development, and then that would lead to the needed policy interventions. Because it's the first of its kind, we need to engage the public on the methodology that we use. So I'm pretty happy the police has raised some concerns, and it's exactly the reason why I've availed myself to speak exactly to how the computation was done. Okay,
and it's a crucial part because for any survey of this nature, the methodology is important. How many people are you sampling? What is the distribution, male, female? Where are you sampling them from? Is it representative of the general population? What are your metrics when it comes to the margins of error and all of that? All of these must be paid attention to, else you run the risk of your survey being poo-pooed or thrown into the garbage bin. So tell us, Ghanaians are watching you this morning. What exactly went into the methodology to make it watertight and meet international standards?
Benjamin, I think you've started the conversation very well, because for any statistical product that we put out there, we make sure it goes through a quality assurance process. We make sure it follows scientific processes, and more importantly, it meets international standards. So for this particular survey, as you rightly indicated, it was initiated by the Commission on Human Rights and Administrative Justice. So when they approached us, we said, one, we've not done this before. We don't think when it comes to the data collection, it's going to be a challenge. We definitely can't do it, but we'll need technical advice in terms of how to make the exercise internationally comparable, knowing that it's one of the Sustainable Development Goals, specifically the 16.5.1, which measures prevalence of bribe payment. And this is what should be our starting point. The SDGs measures prevalence of bribe payment using the proportion of the population that have made contact with public officials over a period of time, specifically 12 months. So if you've not made contact with a public official, you are outside the domain for the computation. In our previous exercises where we did surveys related to corruption, we didn't use the denominator as people who had made contact with a public official. And then once you've made contact and you had to pay bribe, or you were asked to pay bribe and you refused, that becomes your numerator. So we need to keep in contact that our preoccupation had to do with the public institutions that persons in Ghana make contact with. And that is why the concern of Ghana Police on what institution is there, which institution is there, from our point of view, does not really matter, because the data is not from an institution point of view, the data is from a household point of view, and in each household, we identify an adult 18 years and older, And the first question we ask is whether you've made contact with a public official or not. So the first criteria...
A public official across the board.
A public official across the board. But keep in mind that we would want a representative number to make any statistical analysis. You cannot do statistical analysis with any number such as 10, 20, because once you have that number for the entire country, you wouldn't be able to do any disaggregation. So our first preoccupation was which public officials do persons in Ghana come into contact with most often.
Right.
And that guided it. So we had representativeness from a regional point of view, but not necessarily representativeness across the over 300 institutions that we have in the country. So when we're doing the sample to arrive at the population, the factors that went into determining the sample size, which is 15,000 households, the type of institution was not part of it. Although our report comes out to say that within a particular institution, this is our finding on the prevalence of bribe payment. And that is why we see those institutions there. Indeed, we were very mindful of other institutions in Ghana. So if you look at our instrument, for instance, we have the last category, other public or civil service institutions. And the number that we get in there is very negligible because most people make contact with the 23 institutions that we have in our report relative to the over 260 other institutions that we have in the country. And the other thing that we always need to take into account when we are doing this is how do you make your work internationally comparable? If over time Ghana wants to do a country-specific assignment to look at all institutions, Ghana Statistical Service can do that. And that would not be looking at it necessarily from the household point of view. That would be looking at it from the institution's point of view.
Right.
So we'll list all the institutions and then we would ask ourselves the simple question, do you want to get this from a survey or you want to get this from an administrative data source? So their concern on which institution is there, which institution is not there, from our point of view, was not a preoccupation.
Let's hold it right there for a bit, because yes, some feel aggrieved. You lumped up some institutions together for the purposes of this survey. In fact, in that police statement from page 1 of 5, point I, it says, it has been observed that the research did not cover some other public institutions such as the GPHA, the Ghana Ports and Harbours Authority, Ghana Civil Aviation Authority, Audit Service, Parliamentary Service. It goes on, including the AG's department, the Registrar General's department. And in the second point, makes mention of the fact that even SHRAJ, which commissioned this, and your outfit, the Ghana Statistical Service, were not covered. How do you respond to that? I see that you're saying, yes, in future, we could look at different dynamics and broaden them. But why were your outfits, especially as you were spearheading this, not included?
So this goes back to what I said earlier on. When you are doing statistical data production, you need to ask yourself, what is your source of information? Our primary response target was not institutions. We didn't gather the data from institutions' point of view. We gathered the data from the public point of view. And the public, we chose the criteria whether you've made contact with a particular institution or not. So if out of our sample, you have, let's say, only 5 people making contact with the Narcotics Board, Ghana Statistical Service, SHRAJ, how many of us come into contact with these institutions?
Right.
So statistically, you cannot make any inference based on that. It's statistically, you cannot do that. So if you want to specifically do something with audit, approach it and make it purposive for audit and gather all those who get into contact with audit. And that would be a different sampling approach. But if you want to have the prevalence of bribe payment for the entire country, your point of entry should be the population, not the institution. And this work has nothing to do with targeting one institution or the other.
Because definitely, I mean, the Ghana Police Service, for example, which has responded to this, others have not, but they have taken the time to respond, would feel that you were being selective in your approach, that you were feeding into a general stereotype. And they even talk about the fact that, look, like you've mentioned, the interactions with members of the Ghana Police Service, it's on a daily basis across the country. And so if you want to use any statistics, maybe you might want to, if you pick one from some institution and you pick one from them, looking at how broad they are spread across the country and the interactions every day. You have MTCD officers and all of that. It wouldn't be a fair picture to paint, whether maybe 5 officers are spoken to and one takes a bribe. You see those dynamics. And then they also mentioned, for example, that even in categorizing, disaggregating, if you like, only some sections of some institutions were covered. For example, the judicial service is not made up of only judges, like they point out. Lecturers, professors, and teachers are not the full component of the institutions they represent. How do you reflect on this bit? So
I think you've raised a number of issues, and let me step back to the first one in terms of how we went about it, how we involved the police in the process. To contextualize the questionnaire that we got from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, we set up a steering committee and a technical committee right from the questionnaire development stage through the analysis up to the release of the report. And the Ghana Police Service served on the steering committee. So they've been with the process throughout. The issue of aggregating some institutions and disaggregating some institutions goes back to what I said earlier on. So for instance, if you take GRA, where we sort of disaggregated, keep in mind that we want to put out a figure that is statistically significant. So if you get into the police, we can further do disaggregation across the different departments based on the type of service that warranted the payment of bribe. Simply because we have a huge number of persons in Ghana that are interacting with the police. If you take lecturers, teachers, based on the data that we have, once you disaggregate it, you cannot make any statistical inference out of it. And that is why we sort of put them together. We are not saying teachers are the same as lecturers, but the object of this work is to get what? Identify areas that have commonalities for policy intervention. So moving forward, that is
the crucial point, policy intervention, so that we can step in and know that, look, this is where it's heading. Institution X, institution Y, and generally maybe the Office of the Special Prosecutor, Shraj, and others, let's focus on these areas. That was the
absolutely. So the Ministry of Education, for instance, can put in an intervention that covers both teachers and lecturers. So again, I'm emphasizing the preoccupation was not to say that this institution is doing well or this institution is not doing well. Coming back to the point that you raised on the contacts that the public make with police officials, and it's
versus
unfair,
those of other institutions.
It's unfair not taking into consideration the frequency. We are talking about a social issue that we want to eradicate. Once we start playing the game of, because the police encounters the public more often, you need to discount that effect when you are calculating prevalence. All that we are simply doing is to say that because they get into contact with the public more often, this percentage is okay. The computation of the prevalence makes one common assumption. Even if you make 10 contacts and I make 1 contact, you should not pay bribe. So you need to discount the number of contacts that you make with the public. And I'm repeating that again. Even if you make 10 contacts, or another institution has only 1 contact, the number of contacts should not be a justification for the payment of bribe.
Is that statistically accurate?
I wouldn't argue this from a statistical point of view. I would argue this.
Why not?
Because statistics should always operate within the context of a subject matter. That is why I preface that by saying that you want to eradicate something. If you are eradicating something, you don't give clauses that because the police engages more with the public, when you are calculating their prevalence, you need to discount the number of times that they engage with the public.
There should be no room for
we shouldn't do that. If you meet somebody 10 times, it doesn't mean that you were coerced to pay bribe. So then when you are calculating, you say that because you met the person 10 times, I am discounting that effect.
Right.
Statistically, it makes sense because once you meet the person more times, the likelihood of you being coerced to pay is very high relative to somebody who meets the public just once. But once you want to eradicate something like bribe, in the computation of prevalence, whether you've made contact 10 times or you've made contact once, SDGs International says that at least 1 contact should be the denominator, so that we don't make room for things like that, saying that we make more contact, that is why our bribe prevalence is high. Having said that, if you want to calculate the volume of bribe and think about how that affects the nation, then you take the frequency of bribe payment into consideration.
Right.
That is why of the people who pay bribe, we say that in a year, on the average, they do that 5 times. And that is what led us to computing the 17.4 million bribes that were paid in 2021.
Right.
And subsequently the 5 billion bribes for 2021.
Which brings me to an interesting point. I'll get back to the police and what they say. But did you find it curious that the better educated people are, the more they are willing to pay bribes?
Not necessarily, for 2 reasons. One is, anytime you think about the prevalence, think about the contact rate. So the more educated, those with tertiary, engage the public official more than those with no formal education.
Exactly.
So that denominator would always have to be taken into consideration. And that is why we are seeing about the 1.6 times difference between those with tertiary education and those with no formal education. And the second one is the kind of services that those with tertiary education are in need of relative to those with no formal education. So the services and the number of contact that they make with public officials, from my point of view, it's what is driving the 1.6 times difference between no formal education and those with tertiary education.
When you look at point XI, 11 of the statement that the police puts out, they say, as you are aware, one of the major consequences of corruption is its ability to take away resources meant for socio-economic development for the benefit of all. Therefore, the value of the amount lost to corruption will play a key role in determining the prevalence of corruption and which institutions are causing the most harm when it comes to the sizes of bribes paid. Of course, you have a categorization there with the Lands Commission on top, I think over 1,600 CDs when it comes to the actual amount. On that scorecard, the police is, in the lower tier when it comes to that. But do you feel, going beyond this, that you should be able to quantify out of the 5 billion Ghana cedis, for example, this went to the Ghana Police Service, as is suggested by this latest release from the GPS?
We definitely can quantify that. And from my point
of view... Is that something even based on this survey?
Yes.
You can do?
We can do that. The 5 billion, we can allocate it across the different institutions. Let me just quickly walk you through how we did that. So we are saying that 26.7% of the population paid bribe in 2021. Then out of this 26.7, based on those who have made contact, we looked at the average bribes that were paid, and that is what we said 5. So in the data, in the raw data, for each respondent, we have whether you paid bribe or whether you did not, whether you paid bribe or whether you did not. So it's a binary 0-1. If you do that, the per capita bribe payment is 0.98. So if you calculate 0.98 of the adult population 18 years and above, that is when we get, which is about 17.7 million.
Right.
This is where we get the 17.4 million bribes that were paid in 2021. At the national level, we got the average bribe payment of 348 Ghana cedis. So we can simply do this for the Ghana police. Their figure there is 220 Ghana cedis. We can calculate the average. We can calculate the per capita for those who paid bribe to Ghana police, and that will give us the share of payment of bribe out of the 5 billion for the country.
On the back of these questions raised by the IGP, is this something you would want to do? To break it down and put it out there? So we can all see, for example, when it comes to the Ghana Immigration Service, when it comes to maybe lecturers and all of that, judges, those in different components, when it comes to the Ghana Police Service, just to be fair, this is how much per our reality from the survey we know that went through their hands or was lost through corruption. Is that something you would, on the back of this, want to put out?
2 perspectives. In terms of our approach, what we're going to... I just held a meeting with Charge last Tuesday in terms of the next steps. And we've already written letters, we are yet to deliver them, to specific institutions that we want to engage. Our work is not just to create a conversation out of what we do. I said it initially. We wanted to generate a public discourse up to a point that policymakers would want to take up. So this specifically what you are asking, we are not going to do it and put it in the public domain because our interest is not just to rank and put institutions out there, but to get the institutions to act on them. So we are actually going to meet with the Ghana police, and with all that they've requested for, within the limits of the data, we're going to make it available to them to guide how they can curb the bribe payment that is happening within
Which is part of, an integral part of what they actually ask for, because they're saying, if you're saying this, then give us the right information so that we can work with it. But that brings to mind an interesting question. The Ghana Police Service, per this release, appears to say, we were not in the know about this thing you were doing, and all of a sudden you put this out. And in fact, the last point, the penultimate point they make, we want to place on record that we are passionate about this because the continuous empirically and scientifically unsubstantiated labeling of the police service as the most corrupt institution in the country only goes to feed this perception and damage the reputation of the service, as well as weaken the morale of its personnel. So 2 questions. How biased was this? I know you'll tell me about your plus or minus when it comes to the variables and the margin of error. But how biased could this report be? And tell us about the role the police played, because I know they were on the steering committee of this entire enterprise. Let's look at those 2 dynamics.
Okay, so the bias from an institution point of view, Ben, is 0. You can only talk about...
The bias is 0?
Is 0.
How can you guarantee
Yes. You only talk about bias if the variable in question is factored into your sampling approach. This is what I said earlier on.
Intentionally factored in?
Yes, it's part of your calculation. So we reached out to 15,000 households. Did institution play a role in arriving at that 15,000? No, because that was not the preoccupation. The factors that we took into consideration were as follows. Regional representativeness, so that we can generalize across all the 16 regions. We have 261 administrative regions. Given the size of some of the regions, we made them together. We arrived at 234 administrative districts.
Right.
And in each of the 234 administrative districts, we identified urban and rural areas, giving us 468 areas for enumeration. So the issue of institution was not a factor in the sampling. So any conversation around that is a non-starter.
Okay.
That is why I say the bias from an institution point of view is 0.
There was no bias.
There was no bias. There was no bias. But once you've done that and you have a question on which institution did you pay the bribe to, which institutions did you make contact with, and you have a good number, then you can go ahead and do regional disaggregation and whatever demographic disaggregation that you want to do. That is why we're able to do that for the Ghana Police Service and all the other institutions that you have there. Indeed, of the 23 institutions that you have there, for some of them, if we try going into further disaggregations, they wouldn't make any statistical meaning. Because the numbers are simply low. Insignificant,
basically.
You can't do anything.
And statistically, it means you can't even work with them.
No.
Because of the representativeness.
Exactly. I mean, if you have, that's what I say. If you have 5 for narcotics board, what can you do out of it?
Right.
If you put it into our 16 regions, what are you going to get? If you do male, female, 2, 3, 4, 1, what are you going to get? So we always need to be mindful of the statistical representativeness if you are doing analysis.
Let's look at the other point of stereotype, because they say that there's a stereotype already, and it appears you just fed into it. How much of a role does that play, the 6th point they make?
One is related to what you asked earlier on, Ben. If there is stereotype and you set up a steering committee and you have the Ghana Police Service represented on the steering committee, which is the highest decision making for this survey, isn't that an opportunity to address any concerns that you have? So I really don't see that argument. And the steering committee saw the final questionnaire. The steering committee
with the representation of the Ghana Police Service on the steering committee.
Yes.
They saw the final
instrument. The final instrument. Indeed, they had a sense of how the indicators were going to be computed, because we discussed that at our steering committee.
And up to that point, there was no disputing, the questionnaire and how it would be.
Indeed, up until this letter, I had not heard anything.
Were you surprised then by this letter?
I was, simply because of the mode. Because I thought once the Ghana Police was part of the steering committee, if these concerns were there, we should have raised them as at that time. Even if it's an afterthought, which one would agree with it, I thought we should have discussed it and see how we can work with it and improve on it. And I got my letter around 3 p.m. yesterday, and this was in the news a couple of days back.
But how did that make you feel? You hadn't been, I mean, this is on an institutional level. So you would have expected that institution to institution, oh, my brother, these are our sentiments about what happened. How do you explain these to us? But it was put in the public domain, and you officially only got this statement yesterday at 3 p.m. Okay.
No, Ben, I appreciate the challenges with people accepting statistical results, especially when they are not privy to the methodology. So I would really request for a meeting with top management of Ghana Police, do a formal, in-depth presentation to them on the processes, and then we see how we can make good use of this report.
Do you feel if that had been done, maybe this would not have been necessary?
In my mind, it was done because the Ghana Police was part of the steering committee.
So maybe was there a communication gap? Was it that maybe the representative there did not communicate the right information to the hierarchy of the police service? For which reason we see this? Because obviously there was some lack of communication.
I wouldn't want to speak on that because I'm not privy to that information. But the bottom line is that the Ghana Police was represented throughout the processes. During the lunch, the Ghana Police was represented at the lunch. We didn't hear anything. We launched this on the 20th of July to only hear something on the 28th that the Ghana Police is not happy with the methodological approach. And that is what we find a bit unsettling.
Are there any lessons, though, while you talk about the fact that statistically you did everything right as far as this survey is concerned? Are there any lessons you can pick from this 5-page document from the Ghana Police Service? Are there any things they've averted your mind to that you would want to consider moving forward? Because I don't think this would be the last of these reports. I would want to assume that since we started off on this trajectory for the first time of having a rock-solid empirical, if you like, though there are disputations about it, survey of this nature, moving forward, we'll want to do more. Are there any lessons you are gleaning from this piece that you would want to, infuse into your future surveys?
So Ben, let me start with institutionalizing this survey, and we really count on the media to help us campaign so that we get resources to do this work at least every 2 or 3 years. That's the only instance where we can measure the progress, if any, that we are making towards curbing corruption in the country. In terms of lessons, I'll say that a couple have run through my mind since I read this, and one is the engagement with media. We did that in the census. We didn't do that extensively for this corruption survey, where we walk media through the methodological approach, the different sources of data that we need to have a comprehensive idea of what is happening around the issue of corruption. And then once that is done, we go ahead and engage them on the results. We had planned to do it after the results, but given what has just happened, I'm sure if the media were fully aware ahead of the methodological details that we put through, I wouldn't have been here speaking to the issue because you would appreciate what we need to do. I think on the side of the Ghana Police and other institutions that may feel that we've just put them out there, that engagement that we plan post the release also would have to be done prior to the release and get them to say that this is what we are doing, this is what is likely to come out, but the policy interventions that we expect you to get out of this report should be identified in the following areas, and this is how we need to manage the results. And then thirdly, I think the public in general needs education, because sometimes, and at the release, Ben, I said one thing: we shouldn't carry one figure and run away with it. The methodological guide for this exercise, it's on Ghana Statistical Service website. The questionnaire is on Ghana Statistical Service website. And I'm sure a number of people have not read the methodological guide, have not even seen the questionnaire, and they just pick one figure, police,
and run with it.
Police is number one. Why would somebody even think about ranking to the extent that you say it's selective ranking? It's neither here nor there, because we did institution-specific computation of prevalence and the prevalence of the Ghana Police Service is the highest. It doesn't necessarily mean that we are doing ranking and say that this is doing well and this is not doing well. Especially when you know that it's based on contact, it's based on other factors in terms of their dominance across the country, the kind of engagement that they do. There are so many factors that should be taken into consideration before one thinks about ranking. And there's nowhere in our report that we use the word ranking. But now this is what the general public is using as the top story. Police is number one when it comes to bribe payment. I don't think it's very helpful in that regard.
Let's talk about a few more issues, and then we shall wrap the conversation. Is there anything, you oversaw this entire, you spearheaded this, but is there anything in the report that even you found surprising?
I always look at issues from the numbers point of view rather than from the issue point of view, and again with the policy eye. With all this that we're talking about, Ben, nobody is talking about the 3% of the people who report bribe payment. And for me, the 3% is worrying. Everybody is thinking about what government should do.
Right. How about the people in there?
The people. And I always say that the statistics that we put out there is not only for government to put out policies, but we should begin to learn lessons that if we don't report, simply because we think if we report, nothing is going to come out of it, simply because we think it is the norm, then collectively we cannot solve this issue. So that 3% for me is very striking, and it's something that we need public education on, especially the definition of what corruption is, the timing of it, whether it was given out before the assignment, during the service delivery, or after the service delivery. And as you were rightly saying, whether it was initiated by the person in the public or it was a direct request
from the public office.
And in our questionnaire, we excluded those who give small amounts of monies to the public official way after the service had been delivered. So it is not a kind of appreciation that we are talking about here.
Okay.
You understand?
Okay.
So
I get what that represents.
These are the details that we all should know, that when the service is being delivered or prior to the service, you don't go give out if you are not asked. Because once you do that, it doesn't satisfy our cultural norms when it comes to the conversation on bribe payment.
Right.
So if we want to satisfy our cultural norms,
it's post the fact.
Post.
Okay.
Service has been delivered and it wasn't at the instance of the public official.
But there's a danger in there, because in some instances, I would want to believe corrupt officials would also say, I'll do it for you, maybe for trust. I'll do it for you. After I'm done, you give me something. So those dynamics would also fit in.
Once the conversation starts, sorry, I'm cutting in, Ben. Once the conversation starts, then it's corrupt. And I'm not a legal
Okay, so that is clear.
Yes. And they go ahead and even say that if there is the tendency of subsequent service delivery, the definition of after the service has been delivered should be looked at carefully. Because if you do something in 2014 and you know that in 2017, like Ghana Statistical Service, we've done a census, we're definitely going to do it in 10 years' time. And in between, you know that you are going to receive this or you are going to give this to this person, knowing that in 2010, they will have to come back to you again. Once that is established, then it doesn't qualify with the definition that we use for the data collection.
Okay, two quick issues. I want us to address this very briefly. Now, we've started this, but it's all about money. Without the UNODC, we probably wouldn't have this report. Moving forward, how do we institutionalize this? What are you going to do? Are you going to call on government, for example, to maybe fund this moving forward? How much even went into this, if I may ask?
So in total, we spent about 6 million Ghana cedis, but obviously this had a component of the expenditure from the UN ODC side because of the technical support that they provided. But once we are doing this by ourselves, we think something within the region of 5 million Ghana cedis should be able to run a survey like this. We've already.
Is that something you would push for, maybe moving forward every year, for maybe government as part of what it gives the Ghana Statistical Service to factor this into your budget so that you can keep up with these reports, factual reports, so that it can also keep us on our toes? Because look, 5 million Ghana cedis versus 5 billion lost in corruption. That is a drop in a bucket. What's that?
Yeah.
1%?
Yeah.
1%.
Yeah.
You know?
No, 10%.
10%.
Yeah, so we've already started conversations on that. Unfortunately, the conversations are from the international development partners' point of view. What we're going to do together with Shraj is to approach the Minister for Finance to see what government can do in terms of whether every year or every 2 years. What I seek to achieve is a conversation on it has to be institutionalized. Then the second issue would be how regularly do you want to do it? Every year, 2 years, or 3 years? And Ben, to be honest with you, I'm pretty flexible, anything within 1 to 3 years. The ideal would be 1 year every time, but it might put a lot of pressure on the government, knowing that there are other equally important surveys that we need to do. But once Ghana takes hold of this, then all these other concerns that are coming up, whether the data is from the household, the data is from the institution, these institutions are left out, it is our work, we would have control over it and make it address our needs. Because as we speak, I hypothesize that the 5 billion is underestimation of what potentially might be happening. On the backdrop that the average figure for bribe payment over the whole year is 348 per bribe payer, which I think it's pretty much on the low side, given what anecdotally we hear people saying when it comes to bribe payment.
So basically, just to reiterate, you're going to be meeting soon with the hierarchy of the Ghana Police Service to deliberate on this. Formally, have you invited them? Have they invited
No, as I said, I got a letter just 3 p.m. yesterday.
Okay.
I need to engage with Shraj. We're going to call for a steering committee meeting, and the Ghana Police hopefully will be at the steering committee meeting, and then we'll deliberate further on the right approach to use. In my mind, we need to use the representative of the Ghana Police at the steering committee as the conduit in reaching the management of Ghana Police. And I hope that that will be hastening to bring this issue to an amicable end.
To wrap everything, Prof, I cannot do this without doing this. It would be remiss of me. The inflationary rate has been, I know this is not part of the conversation, but I can't have the government statistician here and not put this up. It's been galloping. We've seen some of the highest rates. In fact, someone made mention of the fact that the 29.8% we're seeing now is the same we saw in around 2003 when we went hipping. Are we to expect anything better in the next inflationary setting? I mean, I know you use quite a basket, over 200 items and all of that. What do you see? What are your projections that you can share with us? Okay,
so I'll speak as a non-statistician, as a Ghanaian, passionate about what is happening, and use the word we're hoping that it tapers, because we all know the implications of high inflation rate on all the other macroeconomic variables. What we are always worried about when we are speaking to inflation is the data is collected in the first week of the month. So in August, we're going to release inflation figure for July, and as I said, which was collected in the first week of July. If policy interventions had an impact after the first week of July, we wouldn't see its effect. Yesterday, I was hearing potential drops in some essential commodities moving forward. All those things would have an effect sometime in the next 2 months or 3 months. But the science clearly shows that the rate at which we're seeing the increases have reduced. And one of the major drivers for the inflation, which is transport, has seen a relatively stable rates in the last couple of months. So we are hoping that, coupled with the harvest that we are seeing or from the rains, we might be seeing something that would be appealing to all of us.
Prof, thank you so much for joining the conversation this morning. Just stay with us. And that has been Professor Samuel Kopina Enim, who graciously has taken the time to be with us this morning and set the records straight. He's also mentioned that he's going to be conferring with the Ghana Police Service to map the way forward. Well, stay with us. We'll be bringing you an analysis of the Global Info Analytics report that indicates that some high-profile members of Parliament risk losing their seats. What exactly are the factors? What could account for this? All of that and more on the AM show up next. Do stay.